The sun was a white, hot coin in a pale blue sky, making the two-lane highway into a strip of shimmering tar. Inside her sensible silver sedan, the air conditioning hummed a steady, quiet tune. Elena Vance kept her hands at 10 and 2, her eyes calmly scanning the road ahead and the scrubland rolling by on either side. It was the kind of empty, straight road that could lull you into a daydream. But Elena didn't daydream. She observed Dotch. She was dressed for comfort, not for a press conference. Dark jeans, a simple black t-shirt, a light linen blazer draped over the passenger seat. Her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. In the back seat sat a soft-sided briefcase, its contents mundane to anyone who might look a change of clothes, some toiletries, a few files for review. The only thing of any real importance was the locked, hardened case in the trunk. But that was out of sight, and, she thought, out of mind. The town of Brookside announced itself with a faded green sign, "Welcome. Population 4,211. Then came a speed limit change, dropping from 65 to 45 in the span of 100 yards. Elena's foot lifted from the accelerator, letting the car coast down to the new limit. She always obeyed traffic signs, especially in places like this. It wasn't fear. It was strategy. Drawing attention was the opposite of her goal today. Main Street was a quiet collection of brick buildings, trying to remember better days. A hardware store, a diner with a flickering open sign, a shuttered movie theater. It was just past 2 in the afternoon, and the heat had driven everyone indoors. The only movement was the slow dance of dust in the sunlight. That's why the police cruiser, parked in the angled slot in front of the town's only bank, stood out so clearly. It was black and white, polished to a high shine despite the dust. Elena saw it, noted it, and drove past, her eyes forward. She was 2 blocks clear, almost at the edge of town again, when the red and blue lights erupted in her rearview mirror, flashing against her silver bumper. A small sigh escaped her lips. Not irritation, just a quiet acknowledgement of a changed plan. She signaled, even though there was no one else on the road, and pulled over smoothly onto the gravel shoulder. The cruiser pulled up behind her, close. Too close. She could see the shape of 2 heads in the front seat through her mirror. She rolled down her window. The wave of heat that rushed in was thick and dry, carrying the smell of hot pine and asphalt. She placed her hands on the top of the steering wheel and waited. The driver's side door of the cruiser opened, and a deputy stepped out. He was a big man, tall and broad, with a thick mustache that hid his upper lip. His sunglasses were mirrored. He adjusted his belt, a gesture that seemed practiced, and walked slowly toward her car. His partner, younger and leaner, got out from the passenger side, but hung back by the cruiser's hood, watching. "Afternoon, ma'am," the first deputy said, his voice a low drawl. He leaned down, resting his forearms on her doorframe, putting his face close to hers. His tag read Crawford. "You know why I pulled you over?" "I believe I was at the speed limit, deputy," Elena said, her voice calm and polite. She kept her hands in sight. "Registration says this is a rental car," he said, ignoring her comment and peering past her into the vehicle. His eyes moved over the briefcase, the blazer, her face. "Long way from home?" "I'm passing through," she said simply. "Passing through?" he repeated, as if tasting the words. "License and registration, please." Elena moved slowly, deliberately. She took her wallet from her purse on the passenger seat, extracted her driver's license, and then leaned over to the glove compartment for the rental agreement. She handed both to him. His fingers brushed against hers as he took them, a contact that felt unnecessary. He studied the license for a long time, looking from the photo to her face and back again. "Says here you're from up north. Big city. What brings you all the way out to our little corner of the world?" "A meeting," she said, offering nothing more. A meeting, Crawford echoed again. He handed the documents to his partner, Mitchell, who had wandered up. Mitchell took them and walked back to the cruiser to run them through the computer. Crawford stayed at her window. "You seem a little nervous, ma'am." "Your hands are mighty tight on that wheel." Elena relaxed her grip slightly, but kept them in place. "Just being cautious, officer." "It's deputy," he corrected, a faint smile under his mustache. "You mind stepping out of the vehicle for me?" This was the shift. The air changed. It was no longer about a traffic stop. "May I ask why?" Elena asked, her tone still even. "Just a routine check. For your safety and mine. This is a high-traffic area." It was visibly not a high-traffic area. The road was deserted, but she knew the drill. Arguing here, on the shoulder, would only escalate things in his mind. She unclipped her seatbelt. Of course. She opened the door and stepped out into the blinding heat. She was tall, but he was taller, and he used his height, standing close enough that she had to look up slightly to meet his mirrored lenses. "Stand right there for me," he said, then turned and began a slow walk around her car. He made a show of looking at the tires, the windows. He paused at the rear passenger side door. "You mind if I take a look inside?" "I'd prefer if you didn't," she said. "There's nothing in there but my personal luggage." "See, that's the thing," Crawford said, walking back to her. "When I see a rental car from out of state, a driver who seems tense, it's my duty to ensure nothing illegal is being transported. You understand? It's for the safety of our community." His partner, Mitchell, came back from the cruiser. He handed Crawford her license and paperwork. "Everything checks out," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "It might check out on a screen, son," Crawford said, not taking his eyes off Elena, "but my gut's telling me something else." He walked back to the passenger side of her car, opened the door, and leaned in. Elena watched, her heart beating a steady, controlled rhythm in her chest. She knew what was coming. She had seen this playbook before, though never directed at her. Not like this dot after a moment of wrestling. Crawford straightened up. In his gloved hand, he held a small, clear plastic bag. It was sealed with red evidence tape. Inside the bag was a single white pill. He held it up so the light caught it. "Well, now," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of false disappointment. "What do we have here?" This was tucked right down between the seat and the center console. "You know anything about this, ma'am?" Elena looked at the bag. It was a standard evidence bag from any police department in the country. It was also completely empty, except for the one pill. It had not been in her car when she got in it this morning. She was certain. "That is not mine," she said, her voice flat. "It was in your vehicle," Mitchell chimed in, a hint of excitement in his voice now. He was leaning against the fender, enjoying the show. "It was placed in my vehicle," Elena corrected, her eyes still on Crawford. She saw the flicker in his jaw, a tiny tick of anger at her defiance. "I don't like your attitude," Crawford said, taking a step closer. The friendly pretense was gone, stripped away by the heat and her calm refusal to be frightened. "You're in possession of a controlled substance. In this county, that means an automatic trip to the county jail. Your car gets impounded. It'll be a real mess. A real long, expensive mess for a city girl like you." He let the words hang in the hot, still air between them. The threat was the point. It wasn't about the pill. It was about the next part. Mitchell pushed off the fender and walked over, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "Of course," he said, his voice adopting a softer, almost friendly note that was worse than the threat. "There is another way. Sometimes, for a first-time offender who's cooperative, we can settle this on the spot. A civil fine. Avoids all that." unpleasantness. Crawford nodded slowly, as if considering a great kindness. A fine? Yeah, that might be the neighborly thing to do, given the circumstances. He looked at Elena, his mirrored lenses reflecting her own composed face back at her. $2,000. Cash. And we can forget this little pill ever existed. You can be on your way to your meeting. They stood there, the two of them waiting. The trap was sprung. They had done this before. They expected panic, tears, frantic calls to a husband or a friend for money. They expected her to be exactly who they saw, a woman alone, vulnerable. An easy mark. Elena looked from Crawford's smug, waiting face to Mitchell's eager one. She let a moment of silence stretch out, long enough for a flicker of doubt to cross Crawford's features. Then she let her shoulders slump just a little. She softened her eyes, let a touch of the accent from her childhood creep into her voice. $2,000? She stammered, sounding smaller. I don't have that kind of cash on me. My purse, it's in the trunk. Maybe I have my card. Crawford's smile returned, wide and satisfied. He exchanged a quick, victorious glance with his partner. Your purse is in the trunk? Well, why don't you go ahead and get it, ma'am? We'll see what we can work out. He gestured toward the back of the car, a magnanimous king granting a favor. He believed completely that he had won. The gravel crunched under her shoes as Elena walked to the back of the car. The heat from the road came up through the thin soles, and the sun pressed down on the top of her head. She could feel the eyes of the two deputies on her back, heavy and sure. They thought they were watching a performance of surrender. They had no idea they were watching her think that her mind was clear. It was a strange, calm sort of clarity that she knew well from other high-pressure moments, though those usually involved boardrooms or crisis situations, not the dusty shoulder of a country road. Every detail was sharp. The smell of hot pine and dry earth, the faint tick of the cruiser's engine cooling, the way Deputy Mitchell shifted his weight, already counting money he didn't have. She stopped at the trunk. Her rental car was ordinary in every way, a silver ghost on the highway. She pressed the button on the key fob. The trunk lid popped open with a soft thunk, rising up to shield her from the deputy's view. It was a small, temporary wall of privacy. Inside the trunk, it was neat. A single, medium-sized suitcase, her soft briefcase. And off to the side, the hardened case dot, it was black, about the size of a large shoebox, and made of a tough, textured polymer. It didn't look like much. To the deputies, if they had seen it, it might have looked like a fancy tool case or a photographer's gearbox. There were no markings on it, no stickers, no identification dot. Elena positioned herself so her body blocked the opening. She placed her purse on the floor of the trunk, making a show of rummaging through it. She let out a small, distressed sound, just loud enough for them to hear. I think my wallet is in my suitcase, she called over her shoulder, her voice still carrying that softened, worried tone. Take your time, ma'am. Crawford's voice came back, smooth and easy. He was enjoying this. The control. The slow squeeze dot with her hands hidden by the trunk lid, Elena's movements changed. The slight tremor she'd put in her voice vanished from her fingers. They were steady and sure. She reached for the hardened case and pulled it toward her. There was a keypad, sleek and flush with the surface. But she didn't type a code. Instead, she placed her right thumb firmly on a specific, unmarked corner of the case and held it there. A soft, almost inaudible hum vibrated under her thumb for a second. A tiny green light, no bigger than a pinprick, flashed once near the latch. It was a biometric lock. The case recognized her dot. She pressed the two latches. They opened with a quiet, precise click. The interior was lined with a custom-cut charcoal gray foam. Nestled in the center was her service weapon, a black semi-automatic pistol, secure in its molded spot. To its left was her credential wallet, its leather worn soft at the edges from years of use. To its right, sitting alone in its own cutout, was her badge. It was not the standard FBI agent's badge. It was the badge of the deputy director. It was larger, heavier. The eagle at the top seemed to spread its wings wider. The star at its center caught the sunlight filtering into the trunk and held it. A cold, bright point of light in the shade. Elena did not touch the gun. That was not the message she needed to send. Not yet, and hopefully not at all. She picked up the credential wallet first. The leather was familiar, a comforting weight in her palm. Then she picked up the badge. The metal was cool. She closed her fingers around it, the points of the star pressing into her skin. She took a deep, slow breath, drawing the hot, dusty air into her lungs and letting it out silently. This was the line. On one side of it, she was the woman they saw, someone to be pushed, squeezed, and forgotten. On the other side, she was a figure of immense institutional power. Stepping over that line would change everything in the next 5 minutes. There would be investigations, reports, careers ended. It would become a thing, an incident, with a life of its own. But as she thought of the planted evidence bag, the casual demand for cash, the smug certainty in Crawford's mirrored eyes, any doubt dissolved. This wasn't just about her. It was about who they did this to when no one was watching. She slipped the credential wallet into the back pocket of her jeans. She kept the badge in her closed right hand, the metal warming against her skin. Then she closed the case. The latches snapped shut with a final sound. She pushed it back to its place in the trunk. She picked up her purse, making sure it was open, as if she'd been searching. She straightened up, turning away from the trunk. For a second, she was just a woman standing in the heat, empty-handed, looking lost. Then she walked back toward the deputies. She didn't go to the driver's side door. She didn't look down or away. She walked directly around the back of her car and onto the patch of gravel between their two vehicles. She stopped about 6 feet in front of Deputy Crawford. The change happened before she said a word. It was in her walk. The slight slump was gone from her shoulders. Her spine was straight, her head level. The expression of worried confusion had melted from her face, replaced by a calm, unreadable neutrality. The air around her seemed to still. Crawford saw it first. His smirk faltered. His head tilted just a fraction, like a dog hearing a strange sound. Mitchell, leaning against the cruiser's fender, just looked confused, then annoyed. "Your purse look a little light, ma'am," Crawford asked, trying to regain his footing with the old, condescending tone. But it didn't land the same way. Elena ignored him. She looked directly into his mirrored sunglasses, where she could see 2 tiny, distorted reflections of herself. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her right hand, the one holding the badge. She opened her fingers. The heavy, star-shaped badge lay in her palm. The afternoon sun hit it full on, and it seemed to blaze. The polished metal threw a scatter of bright, sharp reflections onto Crawford's uniform shirt. His eyes, hidden behind the glasses, dropped to her hand. He blinked. He leaned in slightly, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. It was a badge, but it was all wrong. It was too big. The design was different. Then, Elena moved her left hand. In one smooth motion, she flipped open the leather credential wallet, revealing the shield and her photo identification behind a clear plastic window. She held it up next to the badge. "Deputy Crawford," she said. Her voice was different. It was the same voice, but all the soft edges were gone. It was calm, measured, and carried a quiet density that cut through the hot air. It was the voice she used in command centers and inter-agency briefings. It was absolute. The blood drained from Crawford's face so quickly it was shocking. His tan complexion turned a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth, usually hidden by his mustache, fell slightly open. He stared at the credentials, then at the badge, then back at her face. The pieces connected in his head with a visible, almost physical jolt. The name on the ID. Elena Vance. The title beneath it. Deputy Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. A small, choked sound escaped his throat. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of his entire world cracking in half. Mitchell, from his spot by the fender, hadn't seen the credentials yet. He saw his partner freeze, saw the color leave his face. "Sarge?" he said, pushing himself upright. "What's the—" "Shut up," Crawford whispered, the words barely audible. He wasn't talking to Mitchell. He was talking to himself, to the universe. He couldn't look away from the badge. Elena let the silence hang for 3 full seconds. The only sound was the distant cry of a bird and the hum of faraway heat. Then she spoke again, her eyes locked on his. "Special Agent in Charge Thomas at the State Field Office is expecting my secure call in precisely 7 minutes." She paused, letting the name of the head of the entire regional FBI office sink in. "He is aware of my travel route and my estimated arrival time." She took a small step forward. Crawford instinctively took a half step back, bumping against the side of his own cruiser. "Would you like me to tell him?" she continued, her voice dropping even lower, becoming almost conversational, yet infinitely more dangerous, "that I have been detained by officers from his county? That I am being held on fabricated charges of possession? And that I am currently being solicited for a cash bribe to make those charges disappear?" Each word was a hammer tap, driving the reality deeper. Mitchell finally stumbled forward, peering at the credentials in her hand. When he saw them, his face went slack with pure, undiluted terror. He looked from Elena to Crawford, his eyes wide and pleading, like a child who had just broken something priceless. Crawford's breath came in short, shallow pants. The mirrored sunglasses finally hid nothing. The sheer, paralyzing fear was in every part of his face. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The power structure of his entire life had just been inverted. The person he thought was prey was in fact the ultimate predator. Elena didn't blink. "Well, Deputy?" she asked, the question hanging in the scorching air between them. "What would you like me to say?" For a long moment, there was only the heavy, buzzing silence of the heat. The world seemed to have stopped. The bird that had been crying in the distance had gone quiet. The only movement was the slow, shimmering rise of hot air from the black asphalt. Deputy Crawford's face was a mask of pure shock. The ashen gray had deepened, and a fine sheen of sweat now glistened on his forehead and upper lip. He stared at the badge in her hand as if it were a live snake. His own reflection, tiny and distorted, looked back at him from its polished surface. His brain was clearly stuck, trying and failing to process the impossible scene in front of him. His partner, the younger deputy, made a sound like a gasp caught in his throat. He took an unsteady step back, his boots scraping loudly on the gravel. All the casual arrogance he'd worn just minutes before was gone, melted away by a raw, childlike panic. He looked desperately at Crawford, waiting for his boss to do something, to say something, to fix this. Crawford finally managed to move. His hand, which had been resting on his belt near his own much smaller, county-issued badge, twitched and fell to his side. He tried to speak. His mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. The word was a dry croak. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Ma'am?" "Director, we. There's been—" He couldn't finish a sentence. His eyes darted from her face to the badge, to his own cruiser, to the empty road, as if looking for an escape route that had suddenly vanished. Elena Vance didn't move. She held her position, the credentials in one hand, the badge in the other, her posture straight and unwavering. She gave him no help, no way out. She just watched him unravel. She saw the exact moment the true, terrible understanding fully hit him. It wasn't just about getting in trouble. It wasn't a write-up or a suspension. This was the end of his career. This was federal attention. This was an investigation that would peel back the layers of his entire life, of this department, of every single traffic stop that had ever felt a little too easy, a little too profitable. The sheer scale of it was too big to hold in his mind. It broke him. His legs, which had seemed so solid and planted, began to tremble. It was a slight shake at first, just in the knees. Then it traveled up through his thighs. The tremble became a wobble. He was a big man, tall and broad, and seeing that structure begin to fail was a startling thing. He wasn't thinking. There was no conscious decision. It was pure instinct, a physical reaction to a power so far above his own that his body's only response was submission. His knees simply gave way. They buckled, folding under him. He didn't lower himself gracefully. He dropped hard onto the loose, sharp gravel of the shoulder. The impact sent a small cloud of dust puffing up around his uniform pants. He knelt there before her, one knee and then the other hitting the ground. His head bowed slightly, not in respect, but in a kind of stunned collapse. The younger deputy watched this happen, his eyes wide with horror. This was his training officer, the man he'd been trying to impress all day. Seeing him on his knees was like watching the sun fall from the sky. His own survival instinct screamed at him. If the sergeant was kneeling, then he should be lower. He should be smaller. He stumbled forward and dropped down beside Crawford, his descent just as graceless. He knelt in the gravel, staring at the dirt in front of him. His shoulders hunched. The two of them knelt there on the side of the road in the blazing sun. Before the woman they had tried to shake down for $2,000, Elena looked down at them. She felt no triumph. What she felt was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, a deep and weary disgust. This wasn't justice. This was the pathetic result of corrupted power meeting real authority. They weren't repentant. They were terrified of the consequences. She let them kneel for a count of 5. Let the humiliation of the position sink into their bones. Let the gravel bite into their knees. Then she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like glass. "Get up." The words were a command, flat and absolute. They flinched as if struck. Crawford moved first, clumsily, pushing himself up with one hand on the hot side of his cruiser for support. The gravel stuck to his knees. The younger deputy scrambled up after him, brushing frantically at his pants, his face flushed with shame and fear. They stood before her, not as officers, but as two men waiting for a sentence. "You will not speak," Elena said, her eyes moving from one to the other. "You will not use your radio. You will not touch your phones. You will stand right here, by your vehicle, and you will wait." She finally moved, but only to slide her credential wallet back into her pocket. She kept the heavy badge in her hand. She pulled out her own personal cell phone from her jeans pocket. It was a simple, modern smartphone. To them, in that moment, it looked like a detonator. She didn't make a call immediately. She opened the camera app. She raised the phone and took a photograph of them. The shutter sound was shockingly loud in the quiet. The flash didn't go off, but they both blinked as if it had. The photo captured them perfectly. Pale, sweating, uniforms in disarray, standing against the black and white cruiser, the symbol of their authority, now just a backdrop for their disgrace. "That," she said, lowering the phone, "is the first piece of evidence. She then opened her contacts and found a number she knew by heart. It was not the number for the local field office. That would come later. This was a direct line to the Office of Professional Responsibility at FBI headquarters, the Internal Affairs Division. She put the phone to her ear. The deputy watched her, his breath still coming in short hits. The younger one had started to cry silently, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. They were realizing this was bigger than the local sheriff, bigger than the state police. This was going straight to the top. The line connected after 2 rings. A crisp, professional voice answered. OPR, Analyst Foster speaking. Foster, this is Deputy Director Vance, she said, her tone now all business, reporting in from the field. I need to initiate an immediate incident log. I am safe and in control of the situation. Location is State Route 14, just east of Brookside. I have detained 2 county law enforcement officers. She paused, listening. The person on the other end was instantly alert, their voice sharpening. Yes. Detained, Elena confirmed, her eyes locked on Crawford, who flinched at the word. The charges are attempted extortion under color of law, fabrication of evidence, and soliciting a bribe. I am material witness and victim. The subjects are currently secured and awaiting local authority pickup, which I will arrange next. I need a full team activated. I want forensic accountants pulled in. I want every traffic stop, every cash seizure, every community interaction these 2 have had for the last 5 years pulled and reviewed. She gave the deputies names from their name tags. She recited the license plate of their cruiser. Her voice was calm, methodical, painting a picture for the analyst hundreds of miles away. With each word, Crawford seemed to shrink. He was hearing his professional death sentence being pronounced in calm, bureaucratic detail. I am about to contact local control, Elena finished. Stand by for my secure update in 10 minutes. She ended the call. The 2 men looked utterly hollow. The process had started. It was a machine, and she had just thrown the switch. There was no stopping it now. She swiped on her phone again, this time pulling up a different APA-secure, encrypted messaging system used by the Bureau. She typed a quick, direct message to the special agent in charge of the regional office, the man she had mentioned. *Hack Thomas. Elena Vance. Require immediate assistance at my location. Situation involves corruption of local Leos. I am safe. Sending coordinates now. Need you to contact County Sheriff directly and secure the scene. No warning. Just get him here. She hit send, that allowed the app to share her precise GPS location. A little dot on a map, out in the middle of nowhere, where everything had just changed. She finally put her phone away. She looked at the 2 deputies. They were waiting, trapped in the awful silence between what they had done and what was coming. Your sheriff, she said to them, and agents from the United States Department of Justice will be here shortly. She took a step closer. Her voice dropped, not to a whisper, but to a low, penetrating tone that was somehow worse than a shout. Your interview, she said, starts now. The silence after she spoke was the loudest thing any of them had ever heard. It was filled with the low hum of dread. Deputy Crawford stared at a crack in the asphalt by his boots. The younger deputy kept swallowing, his throat clicking each time, as if he were trying not to be sick. Elena did not move to a more comfortable spot. She stood her ground on the gravel shoulder, the sun beating down. The badge was still in her hand, a cold, hard weight. She was no longer just a woman. She was the scene commander, and this patch of dusty road was her crime scene. You, she said, her voice cutting through the thick air. She was looking at the younger deputy. What is your first name? He jerked as if poked with a cattle prod. His eyes flicked to Crawford, a silent plea for help or permission. Crawford didn't look up. "Answer her," Crawford mumbled, the words barely audible. It's Jeremy, ma'am," the young deputy stammered. "Jeremy," Elena repeated, without any feeling. "How long have you been a deputy?" 7 months. Almost 8. He was wringing his hands, his fingers knotting together. "And how many times have you done this?" she asked. Her tone was conversational, almost gentle, which made it worse. "Done." "Done what, ma'am?" "This," Elena said, sweeping her hand slightly to indicate the roadside, the cars, the whole setup. The stop, the find, the suggestion of a fine. "How many times?" Jeremy's face crumpled. He looked like a kid caught stealing from the cookie jar, not a law enforcement officer. I don't know. A few? 5? 10? 20? I didn't keep count." The words burst out of him, high-pitched and desperate. Deputy Crawford said it was how things were done. A way to handle things locally. To keep the paperwork down. He said the people we stopped, they were always from out of town. They just wanted to get gone. They'd rather pay. He was babbling, giving it all up, and with every word, Crawford seemed to wilt further beside him. "And the evidence?" Elena pressed, still focused on Jeremy. "The bag with the pill? Where did it come from?" Jeremy's eyes went wide with fresh panic. He clamped his mouth shut, looking again at Crawford. This was the line, and he knew it. Crawford finally lifted his head. His face was a mess of sweat and despair. "It was mine," he said, his voice rough. From an old case. A closed one." "You kept evidence from a closed case," Elena stated. "It wasn't a question. It was just one pill. It got logged as destroyed, but it didn't." He was admitting to a felony right there on the side of the road. The dam was breaking, because he knew there was no point in holding it back now. The woman with the badge already knew everything. "We used it for the ones who got smart, the ones who argued. To teach them a lesson," Elena said. He just nodded, a short, miserable jerk of his head. A cloud of dust appeared down the long, straight road, growing larger quickly. It wasn't the sheriff's SUV Elena was expecting. It was a sleek, dark blue sedan, moving fast. It pulled up behind the police cruiser with a sharp crunch of gravel. The doors opened almost before it stopped. 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They were in their 40s, with the sharp, alert bearing of federal agents. The lead one, his hair cut short, took in the scene with one sweeping glance. The 2 deputies standing like prisoners. The deputy director holding her badge, the tension you could almost touch. He walked straight to Elena, ignoring the locals completely. "Deputy Director Vance," he said, giving a slight, respectful nod. "Sack Thomas sent us ahead. He's on the line with the county sheriff now. I'm Supervisory Special Agent Carter. This is Agent Inoue." Elena gave a small nod in return. "Gentlemen, these are the 2 subjects. They have been advised of their rights implicitly by their detention. They have already made some preliminary statements." Agent Carter turned his gaze on Crawford and Jeremy. It was a look of pure professional contempt. "I see," he said. He didn't ask them anything. He just looked, memorizing their faces, their badge numbers. It was more intimidating than any shout. Minutes later, a white county sheriff's SUV came roaring up, its light bar flashing silently. It skidded to a stop, and a large man in a brown sheriff's uniform burst out. He was in his 50s, with a flushed, angry face. He stared, his eyes jumping from his 2 deputies to the suits to Elena. "What in God's name is going on here?" His voice was a boom, trying to reclaim authority. Elena stepped toward him. "Sheriff, I'm Deputy Director Elena Vance, Federal Bureau of Investigation. She didn't offer her hand. Your deputies attempted to extort a bribe from me after planting fabricated evidence in my vehicle. The sheriff's mouth opened and closed. He looked at Crawford. Crawford? Is this true? Crawford couldn't even meet his eyes. He stared at the ground and gave the tiniest nod. The sheriff's face went from red to purple. He wasn't just angry about the crime. He was furious about the embarrassment, the disaster landing right in his lap. You stupid. He began, but Agent Carter cut him off. Sheriff, we'll need to take the lead from here. This is now a federal investigation into corruption under color of law. We will need full access to your deputies' logs, their financial records, your department's evidence locker, and all traffic stop footage for the last several years. The sheriff looked like he'd been punched. The federal takeover was complete and absolute. He was no longer in charge of anything on this stretch of his own road. All he could do was nod, defeated. Things happened quickly then. It was like watching a machine assemble itself. Another car arrived, a local detective from the sheriff's office, looking confused. More FBI vehicles appeared on the horizon. Agent Inoue began cordoning off the area with yellow tape from a kit in his trunk, treating the shoulder like a murder scene. He carefully bagged the plastic evidence bag with the white pill, using gloved hands, while a forensic technician who had just arrived photographed it from every angle. Elena walked to her rental car's passenger side and pointed to the seam between seat and console. The subject, Crawford, admitted to placing the bag here. You'll want to print the entire area. She was calm, directing traffic. But inside, the adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving a deep, cold fatigue. The personal violation began to creep in past the professional shell. The feel of Crawford's eyes on her, the smirk in his voice when he called her Mom. It sat in her gut like a stone. She saw Jeremy, the young deputy, sitting on the bumper of an FBI sedan, his head in his hands. An agent was reading him his rights from a small card. He was sobbing quietly. He wasn't a monster. He was a follower, a weak person who wanted to belong. In a different world, with a different trainer, he might have been a decent cop. The waste of it all felt overwhelming. Crawford was different. He stood rigidly by his cruiser, his hands now cuffed behind his back. He wasn't crying. He just looked empty, a shell of the swaggering man who had leaned on her car window. He was calculating, she could see it, trying to figure out what he could trade, who he could implicate to save his own skin. Zach Thomas arrived last, a tall man with a grave expression. He spoke quietly with his agents, then came over to Elena. Deputy Director, he said, his voice low. I cannot apologize enough for what happened in my region. This is an utter disgrace. It's not your fault, Thomas, she said, her voice tired. But it is your problem now. I want this investigation thorough and by the book. I want every victim they ever rolled, found, and interviewed. I don't care if it was 6 years ago. Find them. We will, he said, his jaw set. You have my word. He offered to have an agent drive her the rest of the way to her meeting, to take her statement later at a proper facility. She declined. She needed the quiet of her own car. She needed to move. Before she left, she walked over to where the sheriff was standing, looking lost in his own domain. Sheriff, she said. He turned, his expression a mix of resentment and fear. A suggestion. When your internal review is finished, consider a community outreach program. Maybe a citizens' academy. Remind people who you're supposed to work for. It wasn't kindness. It was an order from someone who now held immense power over his future. He nodded silently. Elena got back into her rental car. The seat was hot from the sun. She placed her badge and credentials on the passenger seat beside her. She started the engine, the sound strangely normal amid the chaos of official vehicles. as she pulled slowly onto the highway. Driving past the tape and the flashing lights, she didn't look back. She looked ahead at the long, empty road. The meeting she was going to, about budgetary allocations and interagency cooperation, seemed to belong to another universe. She felt, for the first time that day, completely alone. The victory, if you could call it that, felt heavy and sourdough. She drove into the setting sun, the weight of the badge on the seat beside her feeling heavier than it ever had before. The quiet inside the car was a living thing. It pressed against her ears, thick and heavy, after the noise of the roadside, the voices, the radios, the crunch of gravel under official boots. The hum of the rental car's engine was too smooth, too normal. Elena drove, her hands tight on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the yellow line dividing the asphalt. But she wasn't really seeing the road. She was seeing the gravel stuck to the knees of Crawford's uniform pants. She was hearing the choked, teenage sob that had come from the younger one, Jeremy, as the cuffs clicked shut. The cold, procedural fury that had carried her through the last hour was seeping away, and something else was welling up in its place. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a hollow, aching feeling, a profound sense of waste. She had won, utterly, but it tasted like dust. Her meeting, the original reason for this drive, was in a small, modern office building 40 minutes away. She parked in the visitor lot and sat for a moment, staring at the clean glass facade. She took her badge and credentials from the passenger seat. The badge was cool in her hand. She looked at it, really looked at it. The eagle, the shield, the word director. It was a symbol of immense trust, of a system built to find truth. Minutes ago, it had been a weapon she'd used to crush two men. That was its purpose, too, she supposed. But it felt wrong, somehow, that it had to be. She took a deep breath, tucked the badge away, and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. The meeting was with regional managers from a few different agencies. It was about data sharing protocols. It was important, dull work that kept the machine of justice running smoothly. She walked into the conference room, and the conversation stopped. Everyone knew who she was, of course. But they also sensed something. A tension in her shoulders, a distance in her eyes. "Deputy Director Vance," the lead man said, standing. "We heard there was some delay." "A minor incident," she said, her voice perfectly professional. "A flat surface over deep water. It's been handled. Please, let's begin." She sat through the presentations, asked sharp questions, made decisions. Her mind was a split screen. One side processed budget figures and jurisdictional flowcharts. The other replayed the way Crawford's smirk had died, replaced by a primal, animal fear. She thought about the people who didn't have a badge in their trunk. The people who paid the $2,000. The people who sat in a cell for a weekend because they couldn't. How many had there been? The investigation would find out, but knowing the number wouldn't fix the shame they carried. The distrust they now fed. The meeting ended. Polite handshakes were exchanged. As she was gathering her things, her personal phone vibrated with a secure message. It was from Sack Thomas. "Asterisk Crawford is singing. He's implicating a former sergeant who taught him the procedure. He's given us names, dates, approximate amounts. It's a pattern going back at least 8 years. The younger one is a wreck. Just keeps saying he was told it was normal. Forensic audit of their personal finances has already started. The sheriff is cooperating, desperately." Asterisk, she typed back a single word. Thorough. She drove to a quiet hotel in the city. The routine of checking in, riding the elevator, opening the door to a bland, clean room, it all felt surreal. She placed the hardened case on the desk. She didn't open it. She ordered room service, but when the food came, she just picked at it. The exhaustion was bone deep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She turned on the local news. There was nothing. Of course not. The sheriff wouldn't be broadcasting his department's disgrace. It would be a quiet federal cancer being cut out. It would make headlines later in the political sections, reduced to statistics and policy failures. That was the point, wasn't it? To fix the system. To excise the corruption. This was the job. Then why did she feel so terrible? It was because of the kneeling. That's what her mind kept circling back to. The instant, involuntary collapse. It wasn't respect for the law she represented. It was terror of the power. They hadn't knelt to justice. They had knelt to a bigger, scarier boss. They would have knelt for a cartel kingpin or a corrupt senator with the same instinct. It was about the hierarchy, not the principle. She thought about her father, a quiet, proud man who had worked 2 jobs his whole life. He'd told her, "When you get to a place of authority, Elena, you remember that it's not about you being in charge. It's about you being responsible for everyone below you." Crawford's philosophy had been the exact opposite. Authority was about what you could take from those below you. She showered, the hot water doing little to ease the tightness in her neck. In her pajamas, she sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she knew from the Office of Professional Responsibility. "Deputy Director, sorry for the late call," the analyst said. "We've had our first wave of hits from the preliminary data. We've identified 11 likely victims from the past 3 years, just from Crawford's flagged stops. We're starting outreach in the morning. 11 people. Their lives tipped over by a lie for a few $100 each." "Good," Elena said, her voice hoarse. "When you speak to them, be kind. Tell them the officer who did it has been arrested. Tell them the system, however belatedly, worked." She hung up. That was the other side of the hollow feeling. The hope. 11 people might get a letter, an apology, maybe a cleared record. It wouldn't give them back their time or their dignity, but it might give them a little faith back. For some, that was everything. The next morning, she dressed in another simple professional outfit. She checked out of the hotel. The sun was bright, the day new. She loaded her suitcase back into the trunk of a different rental car. The other one was still evidence. She placed the hardened case beside it. Before she started the engine, she pulled out her phone and pulled up the photo she had taken. The 2 deputies, pale and broken against their cruiser. She looked at it for a long time. Then she selected the image and moved it to a secure, encrypted folder on her phone, one labeled Case Files Brookside. She didn't delete it. It was evidence. But she didn't need to look at it every day. She had a long drive back to Washington. The highway was busy with morning traffic, people going to work, trucks making deliveries. Normal life. She turned on the radio, found a station playing old jazz. The music filled the car, smooth and complex dot. She thought about the work waiting for her on Monday. The mountains of paperwork, the strategic meetings, the endless push and pull of politics and policy. It was easy, in those halls, to forget what the badge could mean on a lonely road. It was easy to forget the weight of it. She wouldn't forget. Not this time. A sign for a roadside diner appeared ahead. On impulse, she signaled and pulled off. It was a busy, noisy place, full of families and construction workers. She took a seat at the counter. A tired-looking waitress with a kind smile brought her a menu. "Just coffee, please," Alana said. "Long drive?" The waitress asked, filling a heavy mug. "Yeah," Elena said. "A long one?" The coffee was hot and bitter. She wrapped her hands around the mug, feeling its warmth. She watched the people in the diner. A couple arguing gently over pancakes. A truck driver reading a newspaper. A mother trying to get her toddler to eat some eggs. This was what it was for. All of it, the boring meetings, the hard choices, the weight of the badge. It was for the right of these people to sit in a diner and argue about pancakes without fear. It was for the principle that the color of your skin, the make of your car, the accent in your voice should not make you pray. She paid for her coffee, leaving a generous tip on the counter. She walked back out into the sun, squinting against the light. The road home was still long. The work was never finished. But as she merged back into the flow of traffic, the hollow feeling inside her began, slowly, to fill with something else. It wasn't joy or pride. It was resolve. A quiet, steady determination that was harder than anger, and more lasting. She drove on, the badge in its case in the trunk, a silent passenger on the long road ahead.